After 3 months of surveying in the South Pacific, including a few in what is now called the Marshall Islands, Wilkes and his team steered half of his ships, the Porpoise and the flagship Vincennes, towards the Columbia River on the west coast of the United States for their second half or return trip. The other ships, Flying Fish and Peacock, stayed behind to survey more of the Samoan Islands before returning back to Hawaii in early September. The two ships accomplished a tremendous amount of surveys, collecting data from the Tuvalu Islands and Gilbert Islands, many of which would later be fought over by Marines during the Second World War, like Tarawa and Macon Island. Navy Lieutenant William Hudson, commanding officer of the Flying Fish, also got into a skirmish with local islanders at Drummond's Island after it was discovered during their survey that one of their crew, Seaman John Anderson, had been murdered by the local Gilbertese. Lieutenant Hudson landed a small force of Marines and sailors to handle the situation after a steady bombardment of that island. Hudson regrouped at Honolulu after the encounter and replenished before making his way to the northwest coast to meet Wilkes, who was already long having trouble of his own. Wilkes arrived off the Columbia River at the aptly named Cape Disappointment on 28 April 1841. His ships were unable to cross because of the hazardous conditions that swirled at the headwaters of the Columbia River. Mere description can give little idea of the terrors of the Bar of the Columbia, he wrote in his narrative. Wilkes abandoned the idea temporarily and proceeded north to the Strait of Juan de Fuca and Fort Nisqually. There, the Porpoise surveyed the Admiralty Inlet while the Vincennes surveyed the Hood Canal and the northern coast of the Fraser River. This data is now considered the first official U.S. hydrographic surveys of these waters. Hudson, the Flying Fish, and Peacock arrived off the mouth of the Columbia River on 16 July 1841. He had been given instructions for navigating the difficult entrance of the Columbia River from Wilkes. Because Hudson was late in arriving and did not want to disappoint Wilkes, he and the Peacock attempted to cross through the treacherous bar on the morning of 17 July. After failing on his first attempt, his second attempt saw his ship laid up and grounded on a sandbar. After many valiant yet unsuccessful attempts to get their ship out into deeper water through the day and night, they were able to save their journals, surveys, chronometers, and many of artist Alfred Agate's sketches with the help of some local Chinook Indians. Despite the loss of another ship, life continued for the men of the expedition while ashore. The Scientific Corps set out immediately collecting artifacts, while Alfred Agate drew the local Indians. Wilkes, freshly arrived from his foray up north, decided to concentrate on the area of southern Oregon and northern California. Scientific Corps members Peel, Rich, and Agate went under the command of a naval officer on an overland expedition, 39 in total, while the remaining ships continued surveys, meeting up with them later. Beginning from modern-day Portland, they traveled to the San Francisco Bay Area. The expedition made many significant new discoveries during the overland survey. William Brackenridge made a significant find for the botanical collection near Mount Shasta, the Darlingtonia californica, or cobra lily. Historian Philip Lundenberg called the survey of the Oregon Territory the expedition's most significant geopolitical undertaking. The overland expedition met with Wilkes at the end of October. They surveyed San Francisco and its tributaries before departing on Halloween for Honolulu, arriving 17 November and departing a little over a week later for their grand return trip back to the east coast of the United States. They visited exotic Asian locales on the way back, including the Philippines, Borneo, Singapore, and the Cape of Good Hope in Cape Town at the bottom of Africa in April 1842, before arriving back home at New York on 10 June 1842. Throughout the entire trip, scientists, sailors, and Marines wrote in journals, created charts and plans of new coastlines, drew and sketched new and exotic plant and animal life that they collected, categorized, and classified using the scientific method. Job duties were performed and exceeded on several occasions. Life at sea was never particularly pleasant, if not characteristic of 19th century sailing ships. At one point, while in South America, Wilkes worried about a small local spread of smallpox and how it might infect his sailors and crew members. Thankfully, they avoided such a calamity altogether. Yet that did not diminish the high level of discontent amongst the crew and their leader, Lieutenant Charles Wilkes. The ire he drew from the scientific corps stemmed from his feeling that their mission was secondary to the military mission of surveying and acquiring hydrographic survey data. For the sailors and Marines, Wilkes' self-proclaimed promotion to captain and commodore angered his subordinate officers. Morale was constantly in flux, pushing many of his officers into a state of near mutiny, and 2 Marines to desert. Wilkes and his crew ultimately made history, a history that has had lasting effects that survives to this day. In all, Wilkes and his ships traveled 87,780 miles at a total cost of $928,183.62. In today's dollars, the expedition would cost over $29 million. During the voyage, Wilkes and his scientists collected over 160,000 artifacts. Volumes of material produced by Wilkes and the scientific corps covered everything from ethnology, geography, nautical hydrography, botany, and other disciplines. They collected 4,000 zoological specimens, 2,000 of which were new species. Over 50,000 plant specimens were also collected, including 10,000 new species. Gems, fossils, and corals from distant oceans of the Pacific were also collected. Many of these species and items found from the expedition formed the basis of collections of the Smithsonian Institution, now a permanent fixture in Washington, D.C. The over 250 live plants collected on the return journey were placed in a newly constructed greenhouse in Washington, D.C., which later became the United States Botanical Garden. The illustrations from artists Alfred Agate and Joseph Drayton helped Americans ashore understand the dangers of sea travel, the icy Antarctic terrain at the bottom of the world, and the exciting rituals and customs of indigenous inhabitants around the world. The voyage's lasting impact cannot be disputed. Above all else, it gave American science a national orientation. Because of these intrepid sailors, Marines, and scientists, America gained a strong foothold as a world leader in scientific discovery.